Good morning. Welcome, everyone. Welcome, welcome. I see people are joining or starting to join. Thank you for joining today's session. Let's start with a video while everyone is starting to join. Welcome once again, and thank you for joining today's session, How US and Canada Food Companies Can Enter the Global Halal Food Market. I'll be moderating today's executive briefing, and allow me to briefly introduce myself. My name is Reem Shafaki, and I'm partner at DinarStandard. I'm based in Houston, Texas, and I'll be moderating today's session. And we're pleased to have you with us on this session, especially given the growing demand and interest that we're seeing from North American food and ingredient companies and manufacturer in understanding the halal market and especially how to export to high demand countries and where the barriers are and how to approach market entry. And today's session is designed to be practical. We'll focus on market entry steps across several major halal markets, and especially focusing on Indonesia, Turkey, Saudi Arabia, the UAE, and Malaysia, and focusing on what companies need to know before they start making decisions in terms of the markets that they're entering, what compliance is needed, and their go-to marketing strategies. Now, allow me to walk you through the agenda. So, as a welcome, also our CEO, Rafi-uddin Shikoh, and managing partner will be saying a few words, and then will pass it on to my colleagues, Ibrahim Vahed and Delmar Zakaria, to present, to walk you through the presentation and present the halal market considerations and go-to-market strategies. And then we'll have a Q&A session. So please keep your questions coming. Even now, off the top of your head, if you have any questions that may or may not be answered through the presentation, please go ahead and ask them and use the Q&A tab to ask your questions. And then after the Q&A, we'll close and we'll wrap up the session. So allow me briefly to introduce DinarStandard. DinarStandard is a growth strategy advisory firm, and we specialize in the global halal economy and in advising companies in exporting to Muslim majority markets. We have proprietary global halal economy intelligence and insights that help drive the export growth and investment. And we support companies in acting upon opportunities across halal food and also the broader halal economy sectors. And next, allow me to introduce you to the team who will be presenting today. You can go ahead and please connect with us on LinkedIn. If you scan the QR codes, you will be directed to our LinkedIn profile. So please, we would love to be connected with you if we're not already. And this is our presenting team. Let's move on to the next slide. So to recap in terms of what you'll walk away from this session is where the opportunity is in terms of countries as well as products, how halal certification works, and hopefully you'll leave with a repeatable go-to-market playbook that you can take and look into implementing. And with that, I would like to pass it on to Rafi-uddin Shikoh, our CEO and managing partner, to say a few words.
All right, thank you so much, Reem, and thank you all for joining. As a US-based company, it is our privilege and pleasure to have this session organized to address this multi-billion-dollar opportunity for companies from the US and Canada. As you all are already engaged in this market, otherwise you wouldn't have joined this call. Know that the United States plays a significant part. You'll find out in the presentation that US is the fourth largest exporter in this $300+ billion annual export of halal products, halal food category in particular. However, it is still between 5 to 10% of this market opportunity, and there is indeed a lot more that the companies can do in growing. Today, the fact and perhaps the elephant in the room or top of mind for everyone is the U.S. Iran-Israel war that's happening. Obviously, would have some implication or significant implication in many cases, given the closure of the trade or the disruption of the trade routes and so forth. Our assessment is that, number one, the fundamentals of the demand drivers of halal remain the same. And there is disruption vis-a-vis the flow and the adjustment of some of the trading partnerships and so forth, whereby discussions like this are very important to figure out how these tailwinds and headwinds can be addressed. And my colleague Ibrahim and Delmar will share with you some of those insights and perspective. But we are quite, what we are seeing is that the fundamentals remain the same, the demand remains the same. It's about navigating not just the halal compliance ecosystem, but also the demand drivers in this market. So with that, I will hand it to Ibrahim, who will start going through our presentation with you. Thank you all.
Hello, everyone. Greetings of peace. My name is Ibrahim Vahed. I am the consulting manager at DinarStandard. I'm based out of South Africa. I'm also the food sector lead here within the team. I'm going to take you through the halal market opportunity for US and Canadian companies. So let's start first with a just definition. At DinarStandard, we define halal sectors or the halal economy broadly as sectors affected by Islamic ethics or law. And as you can see, these are just some of the sectors that we track at DinarStandard. These are not all of the sectors of the halal economy. And broadly, these fit into sort of products which are fundamentally affected by certifications, but it also extends into lifestyle sectors, right, where it's more about ethics and values. Of course, you can see the biggest bucket within the halal economy is food, represented by 1.5 trillion US in terms of consumer spending, and this is expected to grow to around 2 trillion by 2029. This is one of the fastest growing consumer sectors globally. And what's driving that growth? Growth is coming from two directions. So from a supply side, governments are actively enabling this growth. We have national halal strategies, intra-OIC trade agreements, and also direct investment, all pushing supply forward. On the demand side, a young and increasingly more affluent Muslim population is spending in line with its values. We're also noting increased online or digital e-commerce spending. So as my colleague Rafi-uddin mentioned, uh, right now the US is already playing in this space. So if you look at the top five exporters to OIC countries, that's China, Brazil, India, US, and Turkey. The US is number four. And if you look at the top five consumer markets for OIC countries, that's Saudi Arabia, UAE, Turkey, Indonesia, and Malaysia, right? And so there's about 421 billion in halal related spend or imports. This is across all sectors, but food specifically is just over a little over 300 billion, of which the United States has 21 billion. Now, this 21 billion, it's although the US does have a very strong position now, it's expected to encounter some tailwinds. Um, at DinarStandard, we are working with governments to develop their national halal agenda, and countries recognize this opportunity. So you are going to experience more competition of new market entrants who are trying to disintermediate that trade. You're also going to experience a fragmented halal compliance landscape as this is constantly evolving, and my colleague Dalma will take you through that landscape and what are the key points you need to understand. But what we can see right now is that it's constantly changing and it is fragmented, which results in higher costs for companies. We're also seeing nearshoring. So OIC countries are looking to nearshore and even in some cases completely localize their supply chain. However, from a tailwind perspective, the US is already the fourth largest food exporter. It's home to the leading food and pharmaceutical companies. Halal food demand is growing than general food consumption. Um, and the US can capitalize on this opportunity provided it plays its cards right. Um, Now, we mentioned that the US is already exporting. And so what are some of these products and which countries? So as you would expect, there are some agri products, soybeans, nuts, wheat, mesclun, legumes, but you also have meat and dairy. And something to note is that even if a product has a very little processing, it would still be subject to halal certification requirements. So these are like the major categories that are being exported from the US and Canada. And where are they heading, right? So they're heading to Indonesia, UAE, Saudi Arabia, Turkey, Malaysia, Bangladesh, and Algeria, right? These are just some of the major markets. So as you can see, the demand exists and the US has existing pathways into this market. However, let's look at what are the fastest growing and largest product categories throughout the OIC. So this is not just what the US is exporting, but let's look more broadly at what is actually in demand in terms of growth and overall size. So these are just a sample of some of the HS codes that OIC countries are importing that are subject to some form of halal compliance. We have the OIC growth in terms of CAGR, right? So a higher CAGR means that this category is consistently growing year on year. A negative CAGR means that OIC countries are importing less and less of these products every year. And on the far right, you will see these are the sheer size and quantum of what is being traded. So if you look at the top, obviously the clear leader here is animal, vegetable, fats, and oils, high CAGR, and the highest category. But then you will see a very interesting dynamic where, growth or CAGR growth and size is not necessarily matched. One particular example is dairy products, which, as you would have seen, the US is exporting dairy products to OIC markets. You will note that although it does have a relatively large quantum and overall size, this market is declining year on year. And so it's important to note and to look at the growth of these markets when you're considering whether you want to play to a long-term opportunity or whether you want to capitalize on some short-term opportunity. Let's zoom in on those top three categories, which we can loosely term as near-term opportunities. So we have number one, we have animal, vegetable fats and oils. We understand that this is a fairly broad category. If you look at, for example, on the animal fats side, this is butter, ghee, but when it comes to the vegetable fats, this is also broad. It's got seed oils, nut oils, avocado oils, etc. So this is quite a broad category, and it's worth unpacking a lower HS code to understand which HS codes are going to which market. But you can see broadly the top markets are Pakistan, Turkey, Iran, Malaysia, and Egypt. The second category we want to spotlight is sugar and sugar confectionery. I think this category doesn't need an explanation. Shout out to Dubai Chocolate. And you can see that the major markets that are importing are Indonesia, Malaysia, Saudi Arabia, Bangladesh, and UAE. And the third category is beverages and vinegar. Look, beverages are obviously the largest part of this category, and it's also a very high growth category. Although you would have seen it is not the largest in terms of size, although it is one of the fastest growing. And the markets that are importing the most are the UAE, Turkey, Malaysia, Kazakhstan, and Iraq. What's important to note here is that there isn't a consistent top five. So when you're looking to import and to access a global halal market, it's worth looking at multi-region instead of just focusing on a particular region. I'll now hand it over to my colleague Dalma, who will take you through navigating regulatory compliance.
Thanks, Ibrahim. Greetings, everyone. My name is Dilmar Zakaria, DinarStandard's research analyst based in Indonesia, specialized in halal regulatory and compliance for food, pharma, and cosmetics products. Previously in the Ibrahim spot, we know where the demand is. But again, when we want to tap into the halal market, before your product can hit the shelves on these target markets, it has to get through the halal compliance. So my job here is to ensure that we are all on the same page to understand the key information of the halal compliance in these target markets. I'll cover four things in general: the players, the ecosystem, who's in charge, the ways we can get up compliant, and the dynamics. First, we need to start to discuss about the halal compliance itself. Well, the halal compliance is not a single stamp or logo. It is a complex multi-layer ecosystem, which each stakeholders play a distinct role. At the top, we have regulatory body, the government body that makes and enforces the rules. Then we have standard body, which translate the halal as a law from Islamic law to a language that can be operationalized in day-to-day operation. Next, we have accreditation body as the organization to ensure that the certifiers are met with recognized standards and giving them authorities. And last but not least, we have halal certification body. These are the organizations that audit, certified, and issue the halal certificate. Now, here's the part that we need to understand. These are four roles, not always four separate organizations. In some countries, one body does several of them, as happened with some of our target markets in today's webinar. That's why every market feels a bit different, nuanced with the other market. Now, in the next slide, we'll understand that these layers don't work in silos. They're all interconnected, from regulators, standard body, accreditors, and HCB. The box at the bottom are us, the companies, businesses, manufacturers that produce halal products. Everything above, from the halal certification body, regulatory, standard, and accreditation, are the complex multi-stakeholder ecosystems that becomes the underlying trust structure beyond the halal logo. But the next question is, who in charge of these role in the target markets that we discuss in today's webinar? Well, in Indonesia, it's BPGPH. You may heard about this organization, a ministerial level organization that recognize certifiers and they issue the final certificate, although they are not a halal certification body. They are a list of halal certification body acknowledged and recognized by BPGPH. Next, in Saudi Arabia, we have Saudi Food and Drug Authority or SFDA and the Saudi Halal Center as the regulators. In context of the Saudi Arabia, it is also act as the halal certification body. Same goes with in Malaysia. We have Department of Islamic Development Malaysia or JAKIM, where we also understand this organization as the among the gold standard of halal certificate in the world. Next, we have UAE. Of course, we have now established under Ministry of Industry and Advanced Technology or MOIAT, and they operate as they giving accreditations to certifiers. So there are list of certifiers accredited by MOIAT. Same goes with those in Turkey. You have HAK or Halal Accreditation Agency, which is accredited halal certification bodies that acknowledged by this market. And you may notice the patterns. Every one of these countries have and publish their own list of foreign certifiers it accepts. So before the company spend dollars to halal certify the product, it is better for us to understand to go to each of the portal and check two things. Does your certifiers on the list and does this certifiers cover the product? And that's actually open up to the next discussion on the halal compliance path because there are actually two pathways for US and Canada companies to achieve halal compliance in these target markets. Pathway one, we're talking about certifying at home through a recognized US, Canada halal certification bodies. By these, you may have the audit and all the paperwork checked by the local US, Canada halal certification body. Or the second pathway, you can choose certified directly under their own scheme, like for example, JAKIM or SFDA or BPGPH. Well, from the pathway one, let me get back to pathway one. There are some notable certifiers that I can mention. IFANCA, for example, Islamic Food and Nutrition Council of America, ISA, Islamic Services of America, American Halal Foundation, or in Canada, we have Halal Montreal and Halal Monitoring Authority Canada. However, each of the pathway may have things that we need to watch out. In a pathway one, we need to understand that recognition or scope specific. So you need to double check on the scope that is being approved by each jurisdiction. And some countries may add further steps. For example, Indonesia's with their recognition registration scheme. And the pathway two, of course, we understand that it may take longer in terms of time, and also it can mean repeat audits, which costs more investment. Now, in the next slide, we also understand about the dynamics of the latest trade agreement. And if we look into the US-Indonesia reciprocal trade agreement, it has chapters and subchapters mentioning about halal compliance and halal related articles, such as the acceptance of the US slaughter practices and the MRA with the US halal bodies. However, since as the end of the June 2026, these agreements has not been ratified yet by the Indonesian government. The public authorities also continue to state that the agreement does not exempt US goods from applicable halal requirements. The wider trade picture with the US with the Muslim markets are captured in the document issued by US Trade Representative titled 2025 National Trade Estimate Report on Foreign Trade Barriers. In these documents, the U.S. Trade Representative have mentioned several times about the halal requirements, and it has become a top concern from the USTR, including some of the regulation and the standards established by the Muslim markets, such as Saudi Arabia, UAE, Indonesia, Malaysia, and the other market as well, such as Brunei. Next, we will talk about the dynamics of the regulation and the ecosystem in these target markets. We have Indonesia as the upcoming deadline on October 2026 will be mandatory halal for imported food and beverage product from overseas. Saudi Arabia with the tightening of the SFD and Halal Center, Malaysia with digitalizing ecosystem, UAE with consolidating under the Moyet regime, and Turkey with the alignment with the SMIC standard. And if you have been watching the dynamics within the halal ecosystem, we may understand that some of these are quite constantly changing. Regulation, accreditation, and mutual recognition, product scope and coverage, and even deadlines and enforcement in these jurisdictions. So it's a things that we need to understand in dynamics. And to halal compliance in this case just get you in the door. Like getting in the door doesn't is not the same with the winning in these markets. And that's next, as we will discuss the go-to considerations in these target markets. Ibrahim, over to you.
Thanks, Dalma. So I'm going to take you through some go-to-market considerations when entering halal market. So really, when we look at go-to-market, it's just answering three questions. Number one, can you actually export, or does it make sense for you to export to these markets? The second question is, what is the local opportunity context? And then the third question is, how do I meet and optimize my compliance requirements? So the first question is confirm you can export. This is a really important step. Obviously, it is really just to check whether there are any bans, either temporary or permanent, in place. For example, certain markets have a poultry ban specifically for the US. You also need to look at if there are any prohibitive tariffs that make it too expensive to export in these markets. And then you also need to look at specifically if you look at if your product requirements within these markets, and there may be logistical considerations and which will affect your decision as to whether you can export. And as you can see, my colleague covered earlier, Indonesia and Malaysia have very, very specific requirements. For example, in Indonesia, there are quotas around dairy and meat. For GCC, there are very specific tariffs. In Turkey, there's a ban on certain products, right? So you need to validate this before you go further. Now, once you've validated and you know that there is, in fact, that you are allowed to export, it's worth unpacking the opportunity. So obviously, we looked at, from a high level perspective, we looked at growth of the opportunity category and the overall size of the market. But you need to move quickly to understand what is the local opportunity context. And what do we mean by that? So firstly, beyond just language and labeling requirements, there are tastes and preferences within each specific market. Certain markets prefer certain formats, pack sizes, and it's important to understand this dynamic in addition to the pricing and where your product would sit in these markets. Again, if you look at some of our target markets here, Indonesia and Malaysia, very high adoption around e-commerce, with Shopee being a particularly highly adopted market platform, even for food, right? And so you have sachet and shelf-stable online products win in these markets. And so you need to look at similar considerations. For GCC, there's premium offerings that are preferable. And you also need to take into consideration the local dynamic of that market. What is the local consumer profile? And the last question is compliance requirements. So my colleague Dalma showed you how do you meet the compliance requirements. There are different pathways, and you need to meet those requirements. But if you are a US or Canadian exporter and you are exporting to multiple jurisdictions, then there's also room for you to optimize your certification. You'll find that with the ongoing changes around mutual recognitions, there's room for consolidation of your certification to ensure that you aren't paying twice for the same certificate. So, in fact, at DinarStandard, we've developed a tool called Halal Path to help you exactly with this challenge of consolidating and optimizing your halal certification. So we look forward to your questions, and I'll now hand it back to Reem. Thank you.
Thank you, Ibrahim and Delmar. And yes, please keep your questions coming. And in the meantime, we'd like to ask you another poll question. Are we ready with another poll question, team? Can we show that on the screen? Okay, so we'd like to hear from you. Which halal market opportunity is the most attractive for your business? Is it high growth import categories? Is it premium specialty products where certification is a differentiator? Is it ingredients and B2B supply? Or you're still not sure? So please, we'd love to hear from you. Okay, can we show the results, please? So most of you, interestingly, are still exploring and not sure. And then next is you're looking into high growth import categories or premium specialty products. Thank you for completing the poll, and keep your questions coming. I see there were a couple of questions. If you have other questions, please add them, and we'll try as much as we can. We have some time to answer the questions. But first, I wanted to introduce a couple of the services that we provide. So DinarStandard provides halal market export advisory. So we help companies, US and Canadian companies, enter the halal market through our 5-step export enablement process. And this is a process that takes 4 to 6 weeks from the initial start of understanding your goals and your products and which markets fit, and then assessing the market potential, and then providing you with a practical go-to-market strategy and introducing you with on-the-ground partners. And we have our partner for the MENA region is the Halal Products Development Company, which is a government-backed entity. And for the Southeast Asia region, it's the Indonesia Halal Lifestyle Center. And we have teams on the ground. You met today Ibrahim and Delmar, but we have across the globe, we have team members across different countries, Muslim OIC countries globally. And the other exciting product that we will be launching soon is Halal Path. And as you have seen, halal navigating halal certification can be a complicated process. And while we do provide advisory, Halal Path is a product that you can use that tells you exactly which certifications are required for your specific products and the markets that you would like to enter. And you will be able to identify all possible certification paths that you can take, as well as which mutual recognition agreements are in place. So if you are potentially interested, we're happy to have an initial brief consultation with you. Let us know. We can have a one-on-one briefing. Reach out to us. Our next slide, if we can show our contact information again. You can get in touch with us. Please feel free to take a screenshot of this. We'll also send you the presentation. You could reach out to us by email or through our LinkedIn, and we're happy to have an initial exploratory meeting with you. Now, I think people are a little bit shy to ask questions, but let me ask the question that we have from Muhammad. In your experience, what are the biggest challenges when exporting to Indonesia halal market? And also, what are the major differences compared with Malaysia? I think that is directed to you, Delmar.
Thank you, Sister Reem, for the question, and Brother Muhammad for the question. So, of course, when we talk about the major differences compared between Indonesia and Malaysia, lies in the regulatory regime. Indonesia operates a mandatory halal certification system for products defined, whereas Malaysia is more into generally voluntary, except where required by specific regulation. So this is a very significant, especially when you talk about non-food, for example, like medicine and pharmaceuticals, and even food, I would say, because aside from the slaughtering products, the food in general still in the voluntary regime in Malaysia. So that will be my take on major difference between Indonesia and Malaysia. Both of the jurisdictions are under government organization for the certifiers and the issuance of the halal certificate, and the both market also require implementation of halal system. So in these jurisdictions, in Indonesia and Malaysia, halal counted as a quality system. If you're familiar with the halal product assurance systems in Indonesia or halal assurance system in Malaysia or sistem jaminan halal in Bahasa in Melayu, these are the systems that are being required by all manufacturers to comply with. So there are sets of clause that we need to comply to be certified in these markets, and that will be a challenge for those that doesn't understand what are the criteria or the clause of the standards. However, I believe for the most established companies in the US, Canada, have been implement at least basic GMP or even ISO. That will be a good starting point for the companies to start from the quality system and food safety management system as the ground to start the halal system for these jurisdictions in Malaysia, Indonesia. That will be my answer, Sister Reem.
Thank you. And I see we have a couple more questions. Abe, our friend from USDA, would you like to ask your question live? And I don't mean to put you on the spot, but if possible, we can allow your video and mic and have you ask your question live. Let us know. In the meantime, let me ask this question that we have, anonymous question. How is the opportunity of this market in Australia? Who would like, Delmar, would you like to answer this? And anyone, if you would like to ask your question live, you raise your hand and we'll allow you to put your camera and mic on. And then in the meantime, if we can allow, once we answer the Australia question, if we can allow Abe enable his camera and his video and mic.
I think I can maybe go ahead with the Australia question. So just to be clear, like, so I think this, whether just to understand better, if you're asking about is there an opportunity for Australia to export to this market, then yes, absolutely. Australia is one of the largest red meat exporters to OIC markets, and so there's significant inroads already for Australian companies to export to these markets. However, if you're asking the other way around, is Australia a destination market? As part of our SGIE report, we do track all halal markets, so not just OIC markets, which includes Australia. And so we do note that there's a significant Muslim population in Australia. The dynamic will obviously be usually when we look at Australia, US, UK, Europe, these markets, there's a different dynamic to these markets compared to the broader OIC, but nevertheless, if I were to just sort of summarize it, it's really in premium product, and there's definitely a growing demand within these markets.
Thank you, Ibrahim. Can we allow Abe to ask his question live?
Can you hear me?
Yes, we can hear you.
Oh,
And
thanks.
please just briefly introduce yourself as well. That would be great.
So my name is Abraham Inouye. I work with U.S. Department of Agriculture, and I've worked with Dinar Standards quite a bit over the last few years, learning and exploring the halal opportunities for U.S. exporters. My question is, as producers from a non-Muslim majority market like the United States, what comparative advantages do we have that would allow us to compete more effectively with countries within the OIC? I know there's a lot of growing OIC, intra-OIC trade, and it seems like that's gaining a lot of steam. And for those who are not within the OIC country, we may feel discouraged because we're not in that kind of intra-OIC trade. What areas should we perhaps focus on that would allow us to compete more effectively, despite not being within that kind of circle of trust or bubble? Thanks.
Thank you, Abe. That's a very good question. Rafi-uddin, would you like to answer that?
Sure. Very pointed question. Hi, good to connect here again with you. This is indeed a critical question, as Ibrahim shared the headwinds and the tailwinds, and part of it is and with the recent geopolitical crises as well, the further nearshoring and South-South and food security driven by both this and the previously COVID is driving a lot of these halal import markets to insulate, or you could say ensure that they can secure their food supply within the region or from within a close reach with partners that they are able to trade with, so forth. I think the United States is in a advantageous position, nevertheless, which is if we are looking at the development of investment activities vis-a-vis the strategy of more domestic production or regional alliances, that the partnership with major producers globally, of which the US has the top food producers globally, is an important part of that strategy. So if we look at just within Saudi Arabia or the region, joint ventures with major food producers from the United States or the European markets or South America. I mean, recently we were involved or we are associated with the Halal Product Development Company of Saudi Arabia, where there is a major joint venture to do a domestic manufacturing by the Brazilian company, as you all would know of BRF. So that's an example, Abe, of how the U.S. companies can continue to play, and there is a default proposition. We are living. I don't think the food ecosystem globally can be a bubble. You know, we live in a global marketplace. The supply chain, different markets have different competencies, and the United States obviously is a major producer of or is part of the major part of the global food basket. And I think that will continue to be the case. It is important to understand these dynamics, Abe, that you pointed out, and as Ibrahim highlighted as well, you know, with the shifting sands of the mutual recognition agreements or trading partnerships, and just knowing and understanding how, especially the investment activity is happening around the shifting strategies, the U.S. companies can continue to play a very strong role. Hope that gives some perspective, but happy to answer further on it.
Thank you.
Thank you, Rafi-uddin and Abe. I see not a question, maybe a comment from Tanvir in terms of the Australia market. And I'm pleased to announce that we have actually produced a Halal Australia report that we will be launching soon. And there are definitely opportunities, and we'd love to connect offline, Tanvir, in terms of your comments. And indeed, it is a high potential market. And if there are no further questions, I will go ahead and close the session. And once again, I invite you to connect with us, to reach out with us if you have any further questions that you would like to ask or ask directly, please reach out. And we look forward to having more of these sessions and would love to know what other areas you're interested in that we can have deeper dives on related to exporting to Muslim majority markets.
Reem,
Thank you.
maybe,
Yes.
yeah, sorry I know because we have a few minutes and Abe did have a follow-up question. So maybe I'll just read that out and for the benefit, given we have some time, where Abe, you also asked that in some of the competitor exporting countries like New Zealand, Thailand, Brazil, there appears to be some government involvement in halal certification. And what do we see as low-hanging fruit for the U.S. government to get involved in supporting U.S. exporters? I'll open it to also my colleagues Delmar and Ibrahim if they want to comment. Top of mind, I do think a government level enablement, you know, and I think you give good examples of New Zealand, Thailand, Brazil. For each of these countries, halal exports is a major part of their exports. It's a major part of their growth strategy. I think for Brazil, it's the second or third largest export category is the products that fall under halal to the OIC market. So obviously national level incentives domestically to boost and enable the certification, you know, addressing the challenges of certification, but also building bridges and with the counterpart agencies in those importing countries. So I know with the trade tariffs, some of the negotiations, some of the things were having G2G, but I would say from a low-hanging fruit point of view, perhaps more of a engaging with the industry to industry and supporting the clarification of this streamlining of the process of certification by helping our companies navigate the best path. And that's why this tool that we are launching soon is to help do that, is to find the best path to the combination of certification and so forth. So these are just top of mind thoughts, Abe, Delmar or Ibrahim, if you have some thoughts.
Yeah, and another notable, thank you for the opportunity, Brother Rafi-uddin. So another notable example is those that initiative coming from Australian government. For the meat product especially, the Australian meat exporters that serving Muslim market must comply with the Australian government authorized halal program. AGAHP, a government-regulated halal assurance framework, and it is jointly administered with Islamic organizations. So out of Australia, they really understand how big their capability, their competitive advantage on beef market, and definitely they understand how it is potential in the Muslim market in OIC countries, and that makes them really use and capitalize that competitive advantage with the framework administered together with the Islamic organizations in the region. That was also uh, an initiative that been really helpful for the Australian to export notable amount of beef products to these markets. That would be my additional points, Butterfield.
Thank you, Delmar. Thank you, Reem. Back to you.
Thank you. Thank you for your questions and thank you for attending. And once again, please stay connected and we look forward to having you at other Dinar Standard events. And please stay in touch. Thank you and have a great rest of your day. Take care.